My name is Eli Morozov. I was a ranger for 17 winters, working out of Port Allsworth in Lake Clark National Park, Alaska. When people ask what that's like, I tell them it's the closest you'll ever get to standing in a painting, until you realize the painting is alive and it's watching you back. Lake Clark isn't the sort of place people pass through. You don't stumble into it. You go there on purpose, or you don't go at all. No highways, no cell service, just hundreds of square miles of pure glacial isolation. Wolves, caribou, avalanche zones, and a sky so wide it makes you feel like an ant. The kind of place that punishes arrogance, where small mistakes become headlines when the body is found. But sometimes there is no body. Sometimes there's not even a trail. In March 2023, I was called in to respond to an emergency beacon that had triggered north of Telequana Pass. That stretch of land is remote, even by Alaskan standards. It's where the maps stop being helpful and the air itself starts to feel different. I flew in by chopper as far as the weather allowed, then snowmobiled the final 8 miles alone. I'd done dozens of these. Missing hikers, stranded hunters, the occasional researcher that wandered too far from their gear. I expected the usual: a broken leg, an empty fuel tank. What I found was something else. A campsite, recently abandoned. But not in a hurry. There was no sign of panic. The tent was still standing, its flap carefully unzipped. Inside, sleeping bag rolled tight, canteen full, rations unopened, a journal half-written, no blood, no animal tracks, no drag marks, just absence. And then there was the camera. It lay in the snow, half buried, clutched by a hand that had gone stiff from the cold. Whoever it belonged to had tried to hold onto it until the last possible moment. The fingers were purple, curled, skin split from the cold like bark on a frozen tree. I took it back with me, logged it. I should have left it there. The video files were corrupted. I ran recovery software 3 separate times. On the 4th try, one file finally played. No sound, just the static whir of digital snow. The footage was dark, early dawn maybe. Trees in the background, nothing moved. Until it did. The trees weren't swaying, they were the only way I can describe it, expanding and contracting like ribs beneath bark, and in between them there was something. It didn't have a form I can explain, no eyes, no face, but it looked. I paused the footage on what I thought was a glitch, some visual distortion in the branches. But the longer I stared, the more I realized it wasn't a trick of the light. It was real. A shape, stretched impossibly tall, almost blending into the pines, but wrong in every way that mattered. Like it was part of the forest, but not meant to be seen by it. That image stayed on my drive for one day before it corrupted itself again. I couldn't open it after that. Not even the frame grab. But I can still picture it. I've tried to describe it to other rangers, but the words fall short. It's like trying to explain the color blue to someone who's never seen the sky. After that mission, something shifted in me. I stopped volunteering for search operations in the interior. I stayed close to station, slept with the radio on, and I started looking deeper into the records. Did you know over 16,000 people have gone missing in Alaska since the 80s? Many never found. No remains, no evidence of animal attacks. Just gone. A lot of it concentrated in the same corridor, from Juneau, cutting through Anchorage, and all the way up past Nome. Locals call it the Alaskan Triangle. Pilots vanish, hikers disappear, planes fall off radar with no crash site ever found. But we don't talk about it. Not officially. I've read reports that were never meant for the public. Pages redacted, radio logs cut off mid-transmission, the kind of stuff that keeps you staring at the ceiling long after your shift ends. And the deeper you look, the more you realize how deliberate the silence is. I met a bush pilot once, retired, 60-something, had flown medevac for decades. He told me, "You ever see a lake that's not on your map? Don't land. Don't even circle. Keep going, no matter what." When I asked why, he just said, "Because the ones that stop don't take off again." I thought it was folklore, a local tall tale, until it started lining up with the disappearances. What I'm about to share with you, these are stories pulled from real dispatch records, witness interviews, recovered footage, and testimonies that were never aired. Each chapter covers a disappearance, a moment, a voice that went silent in the woods, and sometimes something that made it out, but came back wrong. Some of the people you're about to hear were never found. Some were, but what they brought back with them, what they remember, still doesn't make sense. And if you're thinking this all sounds like fantasy, you're not alone. I thought the same. But Alaska has a way of showing you things you didn't ask to see. Stay with me, because this isn't just a documentary. It's a record of what we missed, of what's still out there, and of what happens when the wilderness decides you don't belong. MindFuel presents Alaska. Too many don't come back. Here's what I found. Subscribe to MindFuel, because some truths never make the headlines. They wait in the places no one dares to go, and we're going there. I submitted my full report that week, photo logs, coordinates, the footage I was able to recover. I expected questions, maybe even a formal debrief. But what I got instead was silence. The file was received. That was it. No follow-up. Not even a request to hand over the physical camera. I called the station. The line was busy for hours. When I finally got through, the supervisor told me to get some rest, and that I wouldn't be assigned another field op for the next quarter. It didn't feel like a gesture of concern. It felt like I was being shelved. A few nights later, I couldn't sleep, so I went back into the recovered footage, frame by frame, looking for anything that could explain what I saw. On the 12th pass through, I caught it. Just for a second, on the edge of the frame, past the trees, right where the tree line dips into the ridge, there's movement. But it's not wind. It's shape, elongated, arching. Almost as if something enormous was coiled upright, then unspooled back into the woods before the camera glitched out completely. And behind that movement, bones. A pile, maybe 6, maybe 7 partial skeletons. Some stripped clean, others half buried in ice. I tried enhancing it, stabilizing the image. But no matter what filter I applied, the shape stayed just vague enough to defy logic, but just detailed enough to feel like it knew I was looking at it. The survivor, whoever they were, never made it back to town. Their name never hit the reports. They didn't show up on the registry. Even their prints came back without a match. As far as the system was concerned, this person never existed. So, why were they out there? What were they running from? Or toward? I started digging, unofficially. There was something familiar about that ridge. A few clicks west of Telequana, it intersects with one of the old dog-mushing trails, barely used now but still mapped. Back in the 90s, 2 rangers disappeared along that very trail while following a smoke column. Their last radio call was short. "We see movement. Going in closer." They were never seen again. The smoke column vanished. No tracks, no gear, nothing. Their names were eventually etched into a small memorial rock at the edge of the ranger station. Paul Delaney and Arlen Crow. Both experienced. Both cautious. A month later, after their disappearance, a pilot flying near the same valley claimed to see dozens of lights blinking between the trees, like lanterns swaying mid-air, with no one around to carry them. You won't find that part in the public report. It was blacked out. But I found it, buried in an old, unarchived cassette in the ranger's audio log bin. A half-erased reel labeled only Field B-17. I digitized it myself. That pilot's voice still echoes in my ears. It looked like a forest blinking, but not randomly, like it wanted me to follow it. He didn't. He turned back. Smart. Since then, I've talked to others, retired surveyors, medevac nurses, even an old Yupik tracker who told me something that still makes my blood run cold. He said, "The land keeps things that remember. They're not ghosts. They're places. Places that wear memory like skin." I didn't understand it then. I'm not sure I fully do now, but after what I saw that day, and after what I uncovered, I know this. Something is watching in those woods, and it doesn't care about names, badges, or rescue protocols. It waits, quietly. And every now and then, it lets someone see it. Just enough to ensure they'll never sleep right again. Just enough to make sure the rest of us start asking questions we're not supposed to. That still image from the camera, the last frame, still burns in my mind. A distorted shape. No eyes. No face. But its focus was unmistakable. It wasn't just captured by accident. That thing was looking straight into the lens. Into whoever was holding it. And now, into us. Stay with me. This is just the beginning. In the chapters that follow, we'll unravel what connects these vanishings across Lake Clark, Kobuk Valley, and the darkest pockets of the Alaskan Triangle. Testimonies, recordings, things never aired, and through it all, one repeating pattern. Too many don't come back, but those who do, they never come back the same. Subscribe to MindFuel. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. The photo stayed on screen for 6 seconds. A still frame, pulled from corrupted footage in the deepest wilderness of Alaska. An unrecognizable shape rising between the trees. Distorted, towering, almost lost to shadow, except for one unmistakable detail. It was staring back. What you're about to hear isn't a legend. It's not myth. These are documented incidents. Search and rescue reports, missing persons files, radar logs, and eyewitness accounts. Not rumors, not local campfire stories. Real people, gone without a trace. And one area in particular has swallowed more lives than any place in North America. Locals call it the Alaskan Triangle. On paper, it stretches roughly from Anchorage across the frozen expanse of Juneau, then up to the mining ghost towns near Nome, cutting through some of the most remote and punishing terrain on Earth. Mountains that shift without warning, glacial crevasses that swallow entire snowmobiles, cold that bites through your bones and doesn't let go. And yet, what keeps surfacing again and again in declassified files and search logs can't be explained by weather. Planes disappear off radar, completely. GPS signals short out without warning. Hikers walk into the woods, leaving behind tents, food, flares, everything they'd need to survive, and never return. No signs of a struggle, no animal tracks, not even blood. Just empty footprints that stop mid-stride, like something reached up from the ground and took them whole. Between 1988 and 2023, the state of Alaska logged over 16,500 missing person reports. That's 5 people for every 1,000 residents. And this isn't just isolated to locals. Experienced hunters, trained pilots, forest workers with decades of survival training, people who knew this land, gone. Families left behind with no answers. In 2001, a medevac chopper disappeared on its way back from a successful pickup. Clear skies, daylight, no mechanical distress. The last radio call was, "We see something ahead. Looks like..." Static. That was the end of it. The wreckage was never recovered. No signal, no black box, just one severed headset found weeks later hanging from the branch of a tree 23 feet off the ground. I began this investigation as a journalist. My name is Cal Dalton, former wildlife tracker turned field documentarian. I've worked expeditions in the Rockies, filmed sea storms in the Aleutians, tracked lynx across the Northwest Territories. I have documented the aftermath of landslides, wolf attacks, even a flash freeze in Saskatchewan that froze an entire moose herd solid. I thought I understood the extremes of the wild. Then I got a call from a retired ranger named Eli Morozov. He told me there were patterns in the disappearances, details not in the public files, and that he had proof. He didn't beg, he didn't dramatize it. He just said, "I have something you need to see, but come alone." That was 3 months ago. Since then, I've spoken to bush pilots who refuse to fly near certain ridge lines, even in emergencies. I've interviewed native elders from the Dena'ina and Gwich'in tribes, whose warnings are ignored by every hiker who thinks the trees are just trees. One of them, an older man with cataracts like moonlit ice, said this to me while looking straight through me. "If you hear the howling, stop. That's when you should start running." I asked him what he meant by that. He didn't answer. He just turned, walked away, and started burning sage so thick it stung my eyes. In the time since, I've gone deeper into the park than any permit usually allows. I've followed maps that haven't been updated in 40 years. I've stood in snowfields where not even birds leave tracks. And I've found things. Things I shouldn't have. Scraps of clothing twisted around tree bark, torn in a pattern that doesn't match any known predator. Footprints in frozen earth with no inbound trail, only out. Heading into areas that don't exist on satellite. Symbols etched in the stone beneath collapsed mining cabins. Not English, not Russian, not anything I've seen in 4 decades of backcountry experience. This isn't just about people getting lost. That's the story they let you believe. That the cold is to blame, or poor preparation, or wild animals. But that doesn't explain the bones laid out in geometric patterns. That doesn't explain the trees that bleed sap the color of ash. That doesn't explain why dogs refuse to cross certain streams, or why pilots report whispers coming through radio static when flying over Kobuk Valley. There's something out there. Something that pulls you in, not with teeth, but with invitation. And once it has you, it doesn't give you back. In the chapters ahead, we'll follow 12 recorded cases. A pilot who circled a mountain that shouldn't exist and lived to regret it. A park ranger whose skin turned cold as ice, but never froze. A missing couple whose tent was found inside out, zippers unbroken. An entire hunting party who all woke up with the same mark etched into their backs, none of them remembering how it got there. Some of these stories come with physical evidence, others only words, but all of them begin the same way. With someone entering the forest, me know one thing watching them come in. You're watching MindFuel. Subscribe now. Not for entertainment, for the chance to understand why so many don't return. The first person I spoke to after arriving in Lake Clark wasn't part of the search teams. He wasn't a ranger. He wasn't listed on any official roll. He didn't even have a phone. His name was Jonas Fielding, 79 years old, grew up here, still lived here, a man of the woods, though not in the romantic coffee table book sense. He didn't speak much. When he did, it felt like the words had to push through a wall of things he'd seen and never wanted to speak aloud. I found him living in a weather-worn shack near the edge of the northern inlet. He didn't come into town, didn't accept mail. And the only reason I even knew about him was a ranger, off record, who whispered, "You want stories? Find the man in the cabin with no windows." The place was exactly what you'd expect. Logs blackened from decades of storms, moss creeping up the baseboards, A tin stovepipe angled like a broken antenna. No windows. Not boarded up. Just none at all. Jonas opened the door before I even knocked, like he'd been waiting or listening. He studied me for a long second, then said, "You brought a camera?" I nodded. "Leave it on the porch. You film in here, I won't say a word." I left the gear outside. He stepped back to let me in. The first thing I noticed was how dark it was. Not in a broken electricity way, in a deliberate way. Lamps were covered, the hearth was cold. The only light came from a single candle sitting in the middle of the table, its flame barely moving despite the open door behind me. We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that isn't empty, it's watching. Jonas finally spoke. "You think they're stories, the ones who vanish, the ones who wander in and never wander back." I didn't respond. I knew better than to lead a man like that with a question. He continued, "They don't get lost. Not out here. This land is too clean, too honest. If someone doesn't come back, it's because something took them." He reached under the table and pulled out a sheet of waxed canvas, old, creased, smelling of mildew and ash. When he unfolded it, I saw that it was a hand-drawn map of the region, not just the park. It stretched far beyond the typical ranger posts, beyond even most satellite coverage. There were marks, dozens of them, circles in red ink, some X's too, scratched so hard into the parchment they nearly tore through. He pointed to 3 rings at the heart of the wilderness. These are the places where the animals go quiet, where the snow falls different, where compasses don't point right, and your footsteps feel like they're being followed before you've even made them. I asked him how he knew. He looked at me with eyes that had gone gray around the edges, like he'd looked too long at something you're not meant to see. Because I've been in one, and I got out. He told me about a trapline route he used to run in the early 70s, north of Contrashabuna Lake, just shy of the glacier shelf. Said he was following a marten trail, clear weather, no sign of trouble, until he crossed a ridge and noticed something was wrong. No sound, not even wind. The air felt heavy, like it was watching him breathe. Then he saw something between the trees, not moving, but not still either. Like it was shifting just enough to be noticed only when you weren't looking directly at it. He said it didn't chase, didn't lunge, it waited, like it knew time moved differently there, like it knew he'd mess up eventually. I asked him what it looked like. He said, "Like bark and bone had a child. Tall, wrong. It doesn't move fast, but you only ever see it between blinks." I asked why he built his cabin with no windows. He leaned forward, candlelight flickering across half his face. Because glass reflects. And sometimes, when it's too dark to see what's out there, you catch a glimpse of what's looking in. Then, as I gathered my recorder and stood to leave, he said something I still think about every night. "You want to understand this land? You talk to the ones who've lived under it." I asked what he meant. He opened a side drawer and pulled out a thick, torn page from what looked like a marine log. On it, inked by hand, were a series of Inuit warnings, translated rough, scrawled in pencil beneath the native script. One of them read, "Kalupalik. It does not swim. It waits beneath the ice." I had heard of the Kalupalik before, usually described as a creature from Inuit legend, a being with skin like seal fat, long fingernails, and hair that moved on its own. Said to hum beneath the ice to lure children toward cracks in the frozen sea. But Jonas corrected me. It's not a children's story. It's a warning, something that mimics comfort, something that wears the voice of your family to bring you closer. But once you hear it, it's already too late. I asked if it lived in the water. He shook his head. Water is just one place it waits. But that's not where it started. It came with the ice, before the first names, before the first maps. It's older than your stories, older than mine. That was the end of our talk. He didn't walk me out, just shut the door as I stepped off the porch. I never saw him again. I came back 2 weeks later and the cabin was abandoned, candle wax melted over untouched dishes. The map was gone, the walls stripped of everything, but the floorboards had scratches, long ones, as though something with nails had dragged itself beneath the hearth and back out again. I didn't tell the station. I didn't file a report, because some things aren't for the record. That was my first real warning. The first time I felt the land press against me, not with wind, but with presence. And from that moment forward, I stopped asking if the stories were real. I started wondering how many more were never told. After I left the windowless cabin, the weather turned quickly. I was about 19 miles north of the station, riding solo on a snowmobile with supplies for only 2 days. The plan was to make it to a fire watch tower near the base of the range before nightfall. But by early afternoon, the clouds dropped like a curtain. Visibility hit 0. Wind turned sharp, driving ice at me like ground glass. In Alaska, when weather makes the call, you listen. I spotted the ranger cabin purely by chance. Half covered by snowdrift, its chimney nearly invisible behind a stand of frozen spruce. The place hadn't been marked on any recent park maps. No trail led to it. Just a silhouette of old timber, leaning slightly like it was being pulled down by the weight of something forgotten. The door opened easier than I expected. Inside, dust, cold, and silence. A stove in the corner, rusted but intact. Cotangent, desk, an old weather radio, long dead. No power, no light. I sealed the door, lit a single emergency lamp, and took stock of what little insulation remained. Enough to get through the night if I stayed wrapped and didn't let the heat escape. But sleep didn't come easy. Not because of the cold, because of the sounds. At first, I thought it was wind warping the rafters, a low groaning, like ice settling under the weight of a lake thawing from below. But then it shifted. It moved. Not above me, not outside, beneath me. A bang. Dull, then louder. Sharp, like a closed fist on wood. Then silence. I sat up, listening. The kind of listening you do with your skin, not your ears, where your back tightens and you suddenly feel every plank beneath you as a potential weakness. Another bang. This one from the far corner of the cabin where the floor dipped slightly. Then something else. Not a knock, not footsteps, a scrape, like nails dragging along the underside of the cabin's planks. The storm outside was still howling. Wind screamed through the trees, but this wasn't wind. It was rhythmic, like someone, or something, was moving deliberately beneath the floorboards. I reached for my knife. I knew it wouldn't matter. That's when I heard it. A sound I hope I never hear again. Screaming. But not human. Not quite. It came from outside, just beyond the cabin. Through the layers of snow and ice and years, I heard it. Something screaming. From inside the ice, muffled, twisting, like it had lungs, but not the kind you or I would recognize. It wasn't a scream of pain or rage. It was a call. Something calling up from under the snowpack, calling to be let out. I sat there, frozen in place, until the sound stopped. Not faded, stopped, like it knew I was listening, like it wanted me to hear it and nothing else. I didn't sleep that night. I kept my lamp burning and my boots on. Just before dawn, the storm broke. The wind died. I stepped outside into the stillness, where every branch stood frozen in place, covered in hoarfrost, and the sky glowed that early-hour blue you only see in places untouched by artificial light. And then, I saw them, claw marks, beneath the ice, just beyond the cabin, near where the frost had fractured overnight. The snow had crusted thin over a small depression, maybe 6 feet wide. The surface had cracked slightly. Beneath it, frozen in the layer of blue glass ice, were deep, narrow grooves, 4 of them, each the length of a forearm, scraped upward, like something had tried to climb out. Not down, not in, outside. And the tips? They ended not in a drag, but in a final, sharp puncture, like the thing had either broken through or been pulled back under at the last moment. I didn't touch them. I took one photo, then covered the spot with snow again. Not out of fear, out of instinct. Like something in my bones whispered that it wasn't my place to see it, that staring too long might make it aware of me. I left that cabin without looking back. Hours later, when I returned to the ranger station, I asked about it. Nobody knew the structure I was talking about. No records, no satellite tags, no history of a cabin in that quadrant. And when I showed them the photo, the ice, the scratches, it came up blank on the USB, just a black screen. The file corrupted, like something didn't want it remembered. I keep a copy on an old tape cassette now, analog, stored in a locked box, buried in a footlocker, with a geotag I never uploaded online. Because I think some things can reach through the data, and whatever screamed that night beneath the ice, I don't believe it was the first time. I don't believe it'll be the last. In the next chapter, we head deeper north, into the region where a bush pilot vanished in clear skies, only to return weeks later, without a single memory of flying. And what the audio recording from his cockpit revealed has never been played in public, until now. Before this investigation ever brought me into the woods, before I sat across from men who refused to speak above whispers, I'd heard of Site Delta, not from any public archive, not in ranger briefings, but in the static between conversations. Delta was a code name, whispered between retired officers and old SAR workers, a place deep inside the northern interior, surrounded by glacial ridges and long-forgotten Cold War infrastructure. The stories always began the same way. Back in '94, a group went up to Delta. They didn't come back. And the footage was buried. I thought it was a myth, until I received a manila envelope in my cabin mailbox. No return address, just one word typed across the top: watch. Inside was a high 8 cassette, the kind used in camcorders in the early '90s, and a single Polaroid, faded and wrinkled. It showed a tent, torn open, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. Something had ripped through the canvas with force. No burn marks, no animal tearing, no signs of struggle, just something leaving in a hurry, or being dragged. I transferred the footage to digital and played it frame by frame. What I saw still haunts me. The recording begins with a 6-person expedition team, mostly young men, 2 women, setting up camp near the Bluff Pass ridgeline. Snow is light, spirits are high. They're laughing, documenting weather conditions, logging coordinates. It looks like standard glaciology work. You hear someone mention testing seismic anomalies, which suggests they weren't just there to study ice. They were looking for something underground. Night falls quickly in the footage, and from that point forward, the tone shifts. First, the audio starts to drop out. Voices warble, not just distorted, but wrong. Like the mic is picking up something underneath their speech. Low. Almost like humming. At exactly 2:36 a.m., one of the team members, Aaron, I believe, walks into the shot from outside the tent. He's barefoot, shirtless. His eyes are open, but he doesn't blink. He sits on the floor of the tent and begins rocking, whispering something, over and over. I enhanced the audio. What he says is this: "We shouldn't have mapped it. We shouldn't have drawn it." The footage cuts, jumps to a scene outside. The camcorder is half buried in snow now, recording at a low angle. The tent is shredded, just like the photo, flaps torn outward, poles bent and broken. But the strangest detail? No blood, no bodies, just boots. 6 pairs, neatly lined up, facing into the woods, like they'd all undressed before walking into the trees together. Then comes the final 43 seconds. The camcorder falls sideways. The lens cracks. You hear something moving, on all fours, breathing hard. But it doesn't sound animal. It's too controlled, too intentional. A shape moves into view, but it's blurred, only partially caught in frame. Long limbs, back arched unnaturally, knees bending the wrong way. It's crawling. Fast. And then it stops, just at the edge of visibility. Its head turns toward the camera. There are no eyes, just a stretch of skin that moves, slowly. And then, it smiles. I've watched that clip over 100 times. And every time, it seems like the face notices me a little more. Like it's memorizing me, just as I'm memorizing it. When I tried to track the origin of the footage, I hit wall after wall. The coordinates on the metadata? Redacted. The expedition's names? No matching university or government registration. But the mountain in the background, the jagged outcropping behind their camp? I found it. It's on an unmarked quadrant inside Kobuk Valley. I'm going there next. If you're watching this and think it's just another lost tape story, ask yourself why so many of these disappearances go unmentioned in national news. Ask why footage like this gets sent to people like me, anonymously. And ask what else is waiting in those unlisted ridges, watching, smiling, crawling just out of frame. This is MindFuel. And if you're still with me, you're not here for entertainment anymore. You're here because something inside you is starting to feel what I felt that night watching that tape. That deep, quiet knowing. Some footage isn't found. It's released. Subscribe to MindFuel and stay with me. Because what we uncover next has audio pulled directly from a recovered cockpit recorder. The last flight of a man who swore the sky bent around him before everything turned to static. Kobuk Valley doesn't look like what most people imagine when they think of Alaska. There are dunes here, actual sand dunes, vast waves of ancient sediment curled and cresting like a fossilized ocean that never dried properly. Wind shapes them constantly. Tracks disappear in seconds. Sound travels differently. You can hear your own breathing echo back from behind you, even when there's no rise, no rock, no reason. I'd come here after studying the footage from Site Delta, trying to line up the horizon, pinpoint that jagged outcrop behind the camp, and I found it. Nestled just past Hunter's Hollow, a half-buried path that locals call the Whisper Corridor. No official name, no trail markers, just an old rumor. If you walk through the hollow, never whistle. It doesn't like music. I didn't whistle, I barely breathed. I hiked for 6 hours without pause, only stopping once to send up the drone. The sand was high. Visibility was clean. Clear air, no wind, just the hollow sound of my own steps pressing into the soft ridge. But when I reviewed the drone footage later, something was wrong. I slowed the video. Watched my form move along the crest, alone. No one around, no tracks, but mine. Until frame 14,237. There's a second shadow. It appears just behind mine, longer, taller. It doesn't match my stride. I walk, it waits, then moves again when I stop. There's a pause in the footage, just under 3 seconds, where the drone glitches, then stabilizes. And in that gap, the shadow vanishes. No trace, no explanation. I rewound the clip 40 times. No wind, no bird, no tree. Just a long shape, stretching alongside mine, until it chose not to. I didn't notice any of this in the moment. I kept hiking until I reached the mouth of the inner ridge, where snow gave way to a layer of frozen moss and gravel. That's where I saw them. Footprints, but not mine. They didn't lead to me. They weren't following from behind. They started in the middle of the path, as though someone had been placed there halfway through my hike. My boots are size 11. These were longer, narrower. But here's the part I can't explain. The gait, identical to mine, left, right, like something had studied the way I walked and then replicated it. I called out once. My own voice sounded small, like it had nowhere to go. The valley swallowed it, then returned it. But not exactly. The echo that came back wasn't the same pitch. It was higher, like someone had mimicked the tone and answered. I set up camp just after dark, near a cliff ledge that dipped into the low dunes. My fire wouldn't catch. The lighter sparked, the kindling was dry, but something about the air made it refuse to burn. Like the oxygen was thin. I gave up and sat in silence. That's when I heard it. Whistling. Software faint, but close. The kind of whistling you do without thinking when you're bored or trying to calm yourself. And the worst part? It was my tune. I don't whistle often, but I do it when I hike sometimes. A 3-note loop I picked up as a kid. Almost muscle memory. And what I heard, just outside the tent, moving past the nylon wall like it was dragging a fingertip across the fabric, was exactly that loop. 3 notes, then silence, then again. 3 notes, then silence. I didn't unzip the tent. I didn't move. I sat with the knife in one hand and the recorder in the other. But the recorder didn't pick it up. Playback was clean. No sound. As if the thing that whistled knew what frequency to avoid. When I stepped out at sunrise, the dunes were untouched. No footprints, no disturbances. Except my boot prints had changed. One set of them, the ones leading to where I'd stood near the edge, now had a second set beside them. Not behind, not ahead, beside, step for step. As if something had walked next to me, out of sync, just long enough to learn how I moved, and then left no trail of its own. That night, I packed early. I didn't film anything else. I didn't speak. And when I hiked out, I refused to look at the drone feed live, because I knew whatever shadow I'd seen the day before, it would still be there. And this time, I didn't want to know how close it had gotten. I left Kobuk with more questions than answers. But here's what I do know. Something in that valley doesn't just watch you, it studies you, mirrors you, until the moment it decides it doesn't need you anymore. And when I reviewed my satellite tracker later that night, I found a strange detail. My movement pattern showed 2 blips. One was me. The other was identical, step for step. But it never had a starting point. It just appeared halfway through the journey, then vanished when I reached the station. Stay with me. In the next chapter, we return to a Firewatch tower, decommissioned after a series of unexplained signal disruptions. What I found in the logs inside it, they were written in my handwriting. But I had never been there before. The tower that called my name, subscribed to MindFuel, because whatever's watching from the woods wants you to forget what you saw, and we're here to make sure you never do. I came to Alaska looking for missing persons, but I found something else. A pattern. Tracks that don't match any species. Voices coming through radios that no longer transmit. Creatures that don't just hunt, they learn. I found a map that was never meant to be seen. with places circled in red ink, labeled only as "Do Not Return." And I ignored it. I've seen faces that aren't attached to people. I've read the final words of men who swore the ice itself could think. And I stood in front of something that wore a smile it hadn't earned. I know now why the disappearances don't stop, why search parties vanish, why the air feels heavy out here, even when the wind dies. This place doesn't just swallow people, it sends them back changed. If you've made it this far, then you've seen what I've seen, and there's no forgetting it. But this was only the surface, and what's buried underneath is waking up. Volume 2 begins where the road ends, in a frozen lake that splits itself open, and the thing beneath it that remembers names. Subscribe to MindFuel, because the next chapter isn't just a story, it's a warning.